Good Shabbos. This coming week is Tisha B'Av, and I thought it's appropriate to discuss a section in the Talmud which relates a story about why the temple was destroyed. And it's something that we have studied in our Talmud class, but I think it's worth repeating. And the story goes like this. It says at one time there was a fellow who was left unnamed, who had a friend, Kamsa, and an enemy, someone he didn't like at all, Bar Kamsa. And he was making a party, and at that party he sent his attendant out to invite guests. And he told him to invite Kamsa, his friend, but of course he didn't tell him to invite Bar Kamsa. The attendant, by mistake, went and he invited Bar Kamsa, and Bar Kamsa shows up at the party. When the fellow who's hosting the party comes, and he sees him there, he says, "Get out." He says, "Listen, I don't want to be embarrassed. I'll pay for my meal. Let me stay." He says, "No, get out." He says, "You know what? I'll pay for half the meal. Please let me stay." And he says, "No, please get out." He says, "You know what? I'll pay for the whole feast, everything that's here." And he says, "No, get out." So the Bar Kamsa says, "You know what? Since this feast was also, there was many people attending, and part of the guests were the rabbis of the time, and the rabbis did not protest the treatment of Bar Kamsa." He says for that reason he's going to go and going to speak to the government and tell the government that the Jews are rebelling, and as a result they should be destroyed. And that's exactly what happens. He goes and he says they're rebelling, and he not only that, he says, "You know what? I'll show you, I'll prove to you that they're rebelling. Send a sacrifice to the temple." And non-Jew sending a sacrifice, the law is that you could bring it in the temple. But on the way there, he puts in a blemish, and it says either on the lip or the eye of the animal, which is not considered a blemish according to non-Jewish law at the time, but is considered a blemish according to Jewish law. And then when he comes to the temple, it wasn't fit for bringing as a sacrifice. So the rabbi said, "Listen, it's coming from the governor, the Roman governor. We must bring it anyway." And there's a rabbi there, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas, who says, "No, people will make a mistake and they'll say that you're allowed to bring an offering which has a blemish." So they said, "Okay, you know what? Then we'll kill him. We'll kill the fellow Bar Kamsa who's bringing the sacrifice in order to save the skins of all these people, all the Jewish people." Again, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas says, "No, can't do that, because then people will say that anyone who puts a blemish on an animal, on a sacrifice, will get the death penalty," and that's not true. So they listened to him, and it says because of him, it turns out that the temple was destroyed, the Jews were killed, and we were exiled from the land of Israel because the government accepted the fact that they were rebelling, and they came in and laid siege to Jerusalem, and the rest is history. And the Gemara tells us that because of the anvasanuso, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas, because of the humility or the carefulness of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas in Jewish law, because of him, the temple was destroyed. So a very quick analysis of this story shows that this story isn't necessarily meant to be taken literally as this is particular story, that's why Jerusalem was destroyed. In another place, the Talmud tells us the reason the temple was destroyed was because of sinas chinam, because of unnecessary hatred. And it doesn't say because of the unnecessary hatred of one person, it simply means of all the Jewish people. And it's not necessarily even talking about just people speaking lashon hara, speaking bad about each other, even treating people poorly at a feast. It actually might be reflecting the historical reality that there were some Jews that sided with the Romans, and therefore there was a conflict, and because there was hatred between the different factions within the Jewish people, that's what really destroyed the Jewish people. But I think this story is trying to show a microcosm of that. It's trying to show that not only does this happen on a large scale, the large-scale hatred and large-scale divisions amongst the Jewish people always starts on a small level, always starts at an individual level. Whether it's people speaking lashon hara, whether it's shuls arguing and fighting, whether it's Sfardim against Ashkenazim or Hasidim against Misnagdim, it doesn't matter. It's always starting on the level individual. So they tell a story about how it's one person who created the problem. But it's not, of course, not just that one person, but that one person then which had a feast which was attended by all the rabbis. So in a sense, it's saying that the rabbis acquiesced to this behavior. And what was the behavior? The man who hosted the feast is not mentioned by name. And I believe that's done on purpose because it's trying to say that it's not just that particular man. It's a man. It's the average individual. This is what happens, or what had happened in our society. And if those types of things happen, then you're causing the destruction of the temple. And it's really because of these people, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, they are named because the word Kamsa comes from the word Kamitza, which is what you do when you take a offering, a meal offering, a flour offering on the temple. You actually put it in your hand and you just scrape off the sides and you just take a very small part of it. So Kamitza to me means isolation. It means looking into oneself and not worrying about others. It means somebody who is selfish in their needs. They are upset, they have somebody who's not a friend, and it's going to ruin their party. So instead of saying, hey, I can't embarrass people, this is not the way to act, there's no care in the world for other people. It's only about ourselves. It's only sort of this narcissistic attitude of what bothers us, what we care about, and no empathy for other people. And the fact that the rabbis might not have been guilty of that, and as the leaders of the Jewish community, they might not have been guilty of that particularly, but they acquiesced. They allowed it to happen. And they didn't protest because this man was probably a wealthy man. That causes the breakdown of society, and eventually, on a large scale, things just go wrong, and the Jewish people suffered for millennia as a result of this particular story. And therefore it's saying there was a blemish. The blemish, what was the blemish? The blemish was in the lip or the eye. In other words, it's the lip that speaks the Lashon Hara. It's the lip, it's the people that say things which are hurtful to other people. And it's the eye that sees the hurt that other people inflict on their friends and they don't protest. Those little things which might not be a blemish on a large scale, so saying in non-Jewish law, that might not be a blemish. But in Jewish law, we care about these little things. Sometimes it seems very small. The little comment that you make, the little insult, sort of the inflection in your voice, or just the movement of your head, which might show a disrespect for someone else, and say, "Oh, I didn't mean anything. I didn't say anything." Those types of things are what really is the seed of all of our problems. And it's worse, as the Talmud says in another place, than the three cardinal sins which destroyed the first temple. Because the first temple was destroyed, the Talmud tells us, because of terrible immorality. But that immorality was you could do tshuva, you could change. It's easier to change large-scale sinning, and therefore the destruction of the first temple and the exile only lasted for 70 years. But the problem of the disunity in the Jewish people, of the selfishness and this narcissism and the lack of empathy for other people is so ingrained in people's nature, and once it takes hold, it's so hard to get rid of. We're still waiting for Mashiach after 2,000 years because of the problems that were created in that time. So hopefully we come to this Tisha B'Av, and as everybody always says, the sin was sinas chinam, unnecessary hatred. The way to solve the problem, the way to bring the coming of Mashiach and peace in this world is really ahavas chinam, is love, unnecessary love. In other words, love which is not tluya b'davar, it's not dependent on anything, as the Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos, in Ethics of Our Fathers. It shouldn't be a love which we shouldn't do it only because we have a need, because we have a selfish need. We should realize that we have to feel for every human being, not only just our family and friends and our community, but every single human being in the world, and in a way which is not dependent on our particular needs, but this understanding that everybody should be treated with dignity. Every human being is created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. We have to respect every human being. We have to care about every human being. We have to see their suffering. We have to feel for their suffering and act upon that as much as we could. And hopefully with that, we'll bring about the ultimate redemption. Good Shabbos.